It took less than a minute, just 47 seconds, for Jasmine Crockett to shatter the illusion of order on national television. On live broadcast in front of 38 million Americans, she raised a check marked in deep red ink. $9 million wired from Donald Trump's campaign to a charity carrying Melania's name. 7 silenced women, 3 powerful law firms, a single luxury retreat in Croatia. What if the First Lady's famous composure wasn't innocence at all, but simply part of a deal? Stage four's lighting was warm, almost honeyed, casting everything in a gentle golden glow that looked safe, carefully staged. The presidential seal hung in its usual pride of place, flanked by the signature navy blue drapes familiar from 60 Minutes. The studio camera's red tally light blinked, then steadied. This was a live feed, 38 million viewers, no second takes, no editing room to soften the blow. Donald Trump leaned back in his leather chair, smiling the smile of a man who's already convinced he's untouchable. His red tie was perfectly knotted, his hands folded like a preacher's, ready to deliver his version of the gospel. Opposite him, Melania Trump sat still as carved stone, not a single hair out of place. One gloved hand rested in her lap, the other bare. No wedding ring, no emotion, just calculation. Gayle King sat across from them, polite smile in place, posture relaxed, but her gaze razor sharp. She opened with the usual softballs, gratitude for their time, questions about the coming election, the legacy of their White House years. Then she turned the conversation to charity, Melania's well-known Be Best initiative. Leaning in, voice calm but probing. Mrs. Trump, your foundation's focus on child wellness has been both praised and questioned. How do you respond to those calling for more transparency? Melania didn't flinch, responding with icy precision. We help children. The media lies. My office is dedicated to their future. Before Gayle could press further, Trump broke in. The radical left can't stand a strong woman like Melania. That's why they attack her charity. It's disgusting. Behind the scenes, Jasmine Crockett watched from the shadows, eyes fixed on the monitor, arms folded tight. She held a thick red envelope stamped Confidential House Oversight. Not just heavy in her hand, but heavy with what it could reveal. She didn't fidget, didn't rehearse. Her voice was loaded and ready like a trigger beneath silk. In her earpiece, Crockett, stand by. We cut to you in 90 seconds. Jasmine glanced once at the envelope, then at the screen. Melania's face frozen in a perfect half-smile, the smile of someone who'd built a fortress out of silence and put a $9 million price tag on the door. Back on camera, Gayle shifted the questioning to campaign finances. Mr. Trump, there are reports of irregularities in campaign disbursements, including payments to private foundations linked to your family. Would you like to address that? Trump's smile twitched. Fake news. We've followed every law. The FEC has all the records. Gayle pressed. Specifically, a $9 million payment to an entity under Mrs. Trump's name. The words were barely out when the broadcast cut, screen splitting, unexpected, a director's hand on the switch. The nation blinked, and suddenly Jasmine Crockett was there, front and center, her navy blazer sharp, hair pulled back, eyes alive with fire, holding up that red envelope like evidence in a courtroom. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Actually, Gayle, I have the documents he claims don't exist. Trump's jaw clenched. Melania's chin dropped, just perceptibly, the first time she'd moved in nearly a quarter hour. Jasmine stepped up to the camera, the envelope dangling between two fingers like a loaded weapon. "You want transparency?" she said. "Let's start now." What truth was too dangerous for even the First Lady to speak aloud? The studio lights remained steady. Nothing flickered, no temperature shift, but the atmosphere was instantly different. Tension coiling beneath the glossy surface like a fault line ready to split marble. Gayle King kept her tone composed as she turned back to Trump, focusing again on campaign money. "Mr. Trump, verified documents show a $9 million transfer from your Save America PAC to a foundation linked directly to Mrs. Trump. Can you explain the reason for that transaction?" Trump sat up straighter, chin high, his lips twisting in a forced smile. "It's all above board. Everything's accounted for. You're barking up the wrong tree, Gayle." But the smile didn't reach his eyes. Melania didn't flinch. She sat, every muscle controlled, her crossed legs unmoving, one bare hand brushing the lapel of her jacket, tension just visible in the way her fingers curled. Gayle opened her mouth to press further, but before she could speak, the video feed behind them glitched, then cut abruptly. No warning. The audience gasped. On the studio screens, Jasmine Crockett's face reappeared, unmistakable and poised. She wasn't seated. She stood in a fitted black blazer over a crimson blouse, holding the red folder, its color like dried blood. Her stare was clinical, posture unbreakable. The studio dropped into a hush, so cold it might have frozen the air. Trump lunged forward in his seat. "Who let her in here?" The words echoed around the room like a gavel, angry and desperate. Melania's lips parted, not to speak, but as though the oxygen had suddenly thinned. Her right hand gripped her jacket's fabric so hard her knuckles paled. Still, the live feed didn't cut away. The producers chose to let America watch. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't offer thanks or preamble, just raised the red folder for all to see, voice like chilled steel. $9 million, 7 women, 1 signature. Let's talk about how silence gets bought. Trump spat, "This is an ambush, a setup." But no one was listening to him now. Gayle, turning to the monitor, whispered, "Ms. Crockett, are you alleging the First Lady's foundation accepted hush money?" Jasmine nodded, slow and deliberate. "Not alleging, showing." She opened the folder, movements careful as a surgeon exposing a wound. Inside, wire transfer receipts, PAC authorizations, foundation ledgers, every page stamped and notarized, heavy with consequence. She held a document close to the lens. $9 million signed by Donald J. Trump, deposited into the Melania-style foundation 3 days after a private settlement with a former White House intern who'd signed an NDA. Trump slammed his hand against the table. "That's a lie." But Jasmine never looked at him. Her gaze went straight to Melania. "Did you know what your name was being used for, or help build the vault that kept these women silent?" Melania blinked, once, then again, but kept her mouth closed, her silence no longer elegant, now sharp and dangerous. Gayle didn't flinch. "Mr. President, did you use campaign funds to settle personal legal threats?" Trump stammered, reaching for outrage, but the mask was slipping. The camera caught sweat forming near his hairline. Melania's stillness became unsettling, beauty frozen into something unreadable. Jasmine lowered the folder and stepped forward. "You wanted transparency? Start with why your wife's name is attached to a $9 million transfer that buried 7 women and wiped out one story entirely." What had Melania been hiding behind her public silence? And how long had she truly known? Jasmine, unwavering, extracted the first page from the folder, matte paper, thick and official, the kind reserved for transactions that matter. She let the camera zoom in. At the top, Save America Pack. Midway, transaction dated November 4th, 2021. At the bottom, unmistakable, Donald J. Trump's signature. The check was for $9,000, paid to the Melania Style Foundation. No memo, no explanation, just a tidal wave of money into a foundation that hadn't hosted a single public event in over a year. Jasmine turned the page toward Gail and the camera, her voice as deliberate and cutting as a blade. Why does a style charity need NDAs and 3 corporate law firms on retainer? Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Melania, for the first time, dropped her gaze, not away from the evidence, but straight at it, as if unsure whether she recognized her own signature. But Jasmine could see the fracture behind her mask. No one at CBS cut the feed. No one called for commercials. Even the control room had gone silent. On Twitter, hashtags began to spark. Melania. Money, checks Crockett truth. 9 million silence. Jasmine set the check down on the table, evidence laid before the nation. This wasn't for children's wellness or for fashion outreach. It was money laundering dressed in couture. Trump tried to wave her off. We've donated millions. Leaders do that. Jasmine stood firm. Leaders serve. They don't pay $900,000 in legal retainers to silence women whose only crime was surviving you. Her voice didn't need to rise. Every word landed with the weight of iron. Gail looked from Trump to Jasmine, then at the camera. We've just received documentation of a political PAC transferring funds to a private foundation with no public record of output. Jasmine nodded, eyes unflinching. And that's just the first check. Melania's hands lay motionless, but her lips parted, just enough to show a breath she hadn't meant to reveal. Still, she didn't speak. Her silence had transformed. No longer neutral, now almost strategic. Jasmine slid a second page across the table. Here's a legal invoice from Hullman and Green LLP, marked Confidential Settlement. Same week, same account, same foundation. She paused. If this is a fashion charity, why are all the receipts in legalese? Trump's voice cracked, brittle and raw. Lies, her whole career built on lies. Jasmine tilted her head, eyes sharp as a sniper's scope. Then why is your signature everywhere in the paper trail? The air turned cold, the room shrinking under the weight of a live broadcast that refused to cut away. Millions of viewers watched, no one breathing. Was this really charity? Or hush money sewn into silk gloves and stitched into the fabric of public silence? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Her hands worked with the precision of a prosecutor. One by one, she laid 5 photographs on the glass table, forming a silent lineup. Maria Delson, Sandra Lee, Dina Cow, Tiffany Groves. Each had worked for the Trump family between 2014 and 2019. Different titles, but the same fate. Each had received a legal settlement within 72 hours of reporting private encounters with Mr. Trump. Every single one had signed an NDA. Each was paid to vanish. Not helped, not heard. Silenced. The control room began to murmur, the camera crew frozen. Melania's gaze was locked, not on Jasmine, but on the faces in that silent trail. By the time the 5th photo, Dina Cow, social media coordinator, was placed, even Trump stopped interrupting. Arms folded, jaw tight. Gail leaned forward, voice low. Ms. Crockett, all these women, are they tied to the same payment window? Jasmine nodded. all of them. Same 3-month period, 7 settlements, 1 law firm, and every dollar traced to Melania's foundation. Then came the 6th photo. A woman in a soft yellow blouse, smiling, a child on her lap. Tiffany Grove, executive assistant, 2014-2015. Jasmine let her resignation letter speak for her. I no longer feel safe in this building. The timestamp said everything. And then the 7th. Jasmine paused, not for drama, but as if the air itself had grown heavier. She lowered her voice, barely above a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. She never got to sign a second NDA. Rachel Morelli, intern, age 26. The file, a draft NDA prepared March 29th, settlement approved April 2nd. She died April 4th. Jasmine's eyes stayed fixed on Melania. She never got to sign. Trump shifted, restless. Melania didn't move. Gail's voice shook. Did Rachel's family ever know? Jasmine shook her head. They weren't allowed to speak publicly. It was in the clause. 7 photos, evidence laid bare, their stories sealed by silence. Jasmine's voice carried across the studio. They didn't ask for power, just protection. In return, they got a check and a warning. The camera lingered on the photos, names, faces, dates, a paper trail soaked in hush. What if Melania's silence wasn't just her own, but the currency that kept others quiet? The table looked like a row of tombstones, ghosts without voices, stories without endings. Jasmine didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. The country was already holding its breath. Without ceremony, she drew a new sheet from the red folder. Glossier, branded. It was a brochure for the Haven at Dinaric Cliffs, a luxury Croatian resort on untouched coastline. Jasmine turned it for the camera, showing the gold-stamped slogan, "A place for silence, serenity, and healing." Then came the invoice, stapled behind the cover, listing the expense as Mental Health Outreach Youth Initiative, signed and approved by Melania Trump, chairwoman. Jasmine's voice sliced the silence. This was never outreach. It was a retreat. The document showed 3 executive suites, 7 nights, spa access, charter jet, guest registry, totaling $140,800, paid in full by the Melania Style Foundation. Dated December 6, 2021, 3 aliases matching the initials of the NDA recipients. Trump looked at Melania, but she didn't return the glance. She sat, hands folded, trying to maintain composure. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She produced another document, an internal memo from the resort's concierge desk. Client requested no photography, full discretion, buyout of wing. Signed, Monsieur Trump's representative. These women weren't getting therapy. They were being disappeared, hidden behind palm trees and glass walls under the guise of healing. Gail's voice trembled. And this was filed as a mental health initiative? Jasmine nodded. Filed under youth wellness, routed through a charitable front, buried in PR spin. The pieces clicked together. The resort's logo, a place for silence. Jasmine let the evidence rest beside the photos. For Melania, there was nowhere left to hide. The camera's focus was ruthless. Melania's eyes never left the table, but her throat tightened just enough for the nation to notice. It wasn't fear or regret. It was recognition. She knew this document. She'd seen it, signed it. Jasmine's voice dropped, cold and unyielding. This isn't philanthropy. It's protection, not for the vulnerable, but for the powerful. Trump muttered something unintelligible, but no one in the studio responded. The air felt changed, as if the mask of charity had finally cracked, revealing something much colder beneath. Jasmine let the silence expand. Sometimes documents speak louder than accusations, she said. You don't need prison walls to build a cell. Sometimes all it takes is a mission statement. Were these donations genuine charity or a shroud, stitched from compassion and silence, sold as public grace? The studio was silent. The 7 photographs glowed beneath the lights, and next to them, the Croatian resort invoice shimmered like a confession. Jasmine stood motionless. The documents had spoken. The silence wasn't empty. It pressed down on everyone present, humming like a distant storm. Then the camera cut to Melania. Her face, still elegant, still sculpted, now betrayed tiny cracks. Her eyelids flickered. The hand once clutching her lapel now rested on her thigh, still as stone, as if gripping the last shreds of composure. She blinked, once, twice, 3 times, but still said nothing. Trump leaned toward her, jaw flexed in panic. Say something. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in desperation. Melania didn't move. Gail King leaned in, her voice steady but piercing. Mrs. Trump, would you like to respond? The room felt smaller, like it was holding its breath. Phones across America lit up with live alerts. In Washington, newsrooms froze. The First Lady sat in the spotlight just feet from the truth and said nothing. Her eyes scanned the table. She looked at the check, the invoice, Rachel Morelli's photo. Her lips parted, but no sound came, only a breath, a distance. Trump slammed his hand on the armrest. This is a circus. She doesn't have to answer you. Jasmine kept her gaze locked on Melania. No one's forcing her. We just want to see if she still owns her voice or already sold it. The words cut the room like a knife. The lights felt hotter, the audience blinked, and even the control room let the silence linger, as if it might break itself. Melania adjusted her posture, sitting just a bit straighter, but her eyes didn't meet Jasmine's or Gail's. The truth was sitting inches from her polished hands. Jasmine stepped back, almost as if she were offering the First Lady one last chance for dignity. Because silence isn't always grace. Sometimes it's a debt. The red tally light glowed, live, uncut, millions watching. Headlines were writing themselves in real time. But the woman at the center said nothing. For the first time, her silence wasn't graceful. It was frightening. When the First Lady refuses to speak, who owns her voice? The charged silence around Melania was unbearable. Jasmine didn't press, didn't gloat. She simply reached into the folder one last time and drew out a small black flash drive. No paper, just digital proof, cold and irreversible. She crossed to the main monitor. The crew didn't stop her. The studio was no longer a TV set. It had become a courtroom, a national tribunal. Jasmine plugged in the drive and glanced at Gail. The following footage is from a private 2018 media prep session, backstage at a UNICEF gala. Never aired, independently verified. Trump lurched forward. Fake! Jasmine ignored him. The screen flickered, a handheld phone video of Melania before a mirror, a stylist fussing with her hair, an aide leaning close. Melania laughed, sharp, cold laughter, nothing reaching her eyes. In Slovenian, she said, "They think I care. I just play the part until he dies." The translation ran clear along the bottom. The studio gasped. Real shock. Gail recoiled. Trump jolted. Melania didn't move. The clip continued, Melania applying lip gloss, saying, "It's not about love, it's legacy. I smile. I wear the jacket. I nod. I endure." Jasmine stepped back, letting the footage speak for itself. Trump's voice shook with anger. "That's out of context." Jasmine turned toward him, her movements deliberate. Context, she said quietly. She just told the nation she wears her silence like a mask. The footage ended, freezing on Melania's distant face in the mirror. For a split second, she looked less like a first lady and more like a captive, rehearsing a role she couldn't escape. Gayle King's voice was unsteady. Is this how America remembers her? Not as a leader, not as a mother, but as an actor? Jasmine didn't answer directly. She let the silence answer for her. You can't sell dignity and call it duty, Jasmine said. You don't take $9 million and call it compassion. And you don't laugh about your husband dying unless the mask has already slipped. Melania didn't respond. She sat straighter, her hands clenched, not with fear, but the particular stillness of someone who knows the performance is over, even if the curtain refuses to drop. The screen faded to black. The room was motionless, the truth now exposed and impossible to spin. Had America ever truly had a first lady, or only someone compliant in couture? Then the tension broke. Trump shot up from his chair, fist slamming the table so hard it rattled the soundboard. The echo thundered through the studio. This is fake, fabricated. That clip is a deep fake. This is what they do, manufacture garbage and sell it as truth. It's a setup, a hit job. Gayle King didn't flinch. Jasmine didn't so much as blink, her focus narrowing to Trump, unraveling in real time. She moved calmly, pulling out a single page marked with digital fingerprints. If it's fake, she said softly, why does the metadata say White House Archives? Trump froze mid-outburst, stuck between denial and shock. Jasmine held up the report. Large font, highlighted, clear. Device ID, WHCAM 1422. File owner, White House Press Operations. Location, West Wing Prep Room. The date, February 21st, 2018. The camera turned to Gayle. Her voice was softer, edged with disbelief. You're saying this wasn't leaked or stolen? The footage came from official government archives? Jasmine let the document speak for itself. This was recorded by your media team, stored on government servers, classified as internal prep footage, archived, time-stamped, and forgotten. Trump's lips moved, but no sound followed. He collapsed back into his chair, denial no longer able to prop him up. He didn't look at anyone, not Jasmine, not Gayle, not the camera. Melania sat statue still, profile lit like a suspect under an interrogation lamp. But even in her silence, something shifted, a flicker in her jaw, a shallow swallow. She knew what was on that footage. She'd said it, and worse, she knew it was real. Trump tried again. This is political theater, a witch hunt by Democrat hacks using old footage to smear my family. Jasmine's voice dropped even lower. This isn't theater. Theater needs actors. What we saw wasn't performance. It was confession. She slid the metadata printout onto the table, right between Trump and Melania, as if sealing them off from escape. If it's fake, she said, why did your administration lock it in a federal archive? The studio was paralyzed. The silence was no longer empty, but loaded. And outside the studio, the internet erupted. Clips and hashtags spread like wildfire. Melania knew. Chuck Crockett exposes. The story had detonated and no one could stop the blast. The chain reaction was instant. News anchors interrupted scheduled programming. Screens across the nation split. Jasmine on one side, donation records on the other. Social media caught fire. In Times Square, Jasmine's face appeared on a towering LED screen, her words looping beside a question no one could answer. Outside Capitol Hill, protesters raised fresh printed signs. Silence is no longer elegant. Truth wears heels. Inside the studio, Trump seemed to shrink, the posture of a man no longer certain the room belonged to him. Melania, by contrast, seemed nearly translucent, her silence transformed from poise to emptiness. Jasmine watched the chaos from the center of the storm, not with triumph, but with quiet certainty. Not revenge, not ambition, but purpose. Viewers across the country stopped scrolling and started listening. For once, America was not just watching, but awakening. But Jasmine wasn't finished. As the internet burned with hashtags and the numbers in instant polls climbed, 81% in favor of subpoenaing Melania Trump, she opened a new folder, smaller and thicker, delivered to her office by hand. It wasn't from public archives. This had arrived at dawn, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside, internal financial ledgers, crisp and damning. At the top, Trump Organization Private Disbursement File. The account beneath, PR Control.NDA Mitigation Fund. Gail King leaned in, her eyes narrowing. What exactly are we looking at? Jasmine turned to a new page, showing it to the camera. Line after line of payments flowed from Trump-linked PACs into shell foundations, including the Melania Style Foundation. Each entry carried cryptic purpose codes: L23, legal containment; M7, media neutralization; ND-RED, non-disclosure, high risk. At the very bottom of every page, a handwritten note, just 7 words per line. Jasmine said it gently under the lights. Ivanka signed. Melania approved. Trump insisted. Gail read the lines out loud, her voice almost a whisper. This was coordinated, a family operation built not on wealth, but silence. Legacy and liability, all at once. Jasmine didn't need to shout. The document spoke louder than outrage ever could. Trump's face drained of color as he stared at the note like it had come from the grave. Melania finally dropped her gaze, not in guilt, but recognition. She remembered that note. Do you have proof this is authentic? Gail asked. Jasmine met the camera, voice unwavering. Handwriting verified by an independent forensic analyst. The ledgers match previous exposed transfers. The envelope stamped with a code used only by senior Trump financial officers. She paused. The source included a final sentence. She drew a torn slip from the folder and read, "They thought I'd never speak, but I kept everything." The studio was silent, not out of doubt, but awe. What happens when a family treats silence like currency? Eventually, someone follows the stains. The chain of revelations wasn't built on documents alone. There was a voice in the night, a phone call that tipped the first domino and changed Jasmine Crockett's war forever. It happened at 12:37 a.m., weeks before the broadcast. Jasmine, fresh off a late-night vote on Capitol Hill, had just returned to her apartment. The city outside was quiet, but her phone lit up like a distress flare. No caller ID. When she answered, there was a heavy silence, then a shaky breath on the other end. "I don't have long," a young man's voice whispered, worn thin by fear. "But I've seen it. I handled the wire logs. They said it was for image control, but it was never about image." Jasmine sat on the edge of her desk, gripping the chair, listening as the caller described a hidden world inside Trump campaign finances. The money didn't protect women, he said. It protected power. He didn't say Trump's name. He didn't need to. He worked inside the finance team, handling back-end transfers that no one dared label properly. "It was systematic," he continued, voice cracking. "Legal codes masked as donations. One file literally used the word containment." Jasmine asked quietly, "Why are you calling me?" "Because they won't touch you. You're not afraid of them." I've seen what happens to people who are. He hesitated, then added, the intern, the one who died. Rachel, she called too, before she was gone. Jasmine's grip tightened. She stared out her window at the empty DC streets, her reflection a woman on the brink of a firestorm. Do you have documents? She asked. I kept everything. Copies, originals, scans, even a receipt they forgot to shred. Send it to me. There was silence. Then the voice came, thinner, almost gone. If I do, you'll be their next target. Jasmine's voice was sharp, determined. Let them aim, but if they built their house on silence, I'll burn down the shield. The line went dead. No name, no goodbye. Just the hum of a call that would change history. Weeks later, the red folder arrived, containing everything, files, receipts, originals. But it wasn't just paper that haunted Jasmine. It was the voice, a whisper in the darkness, not of revenge, but of the cost of truth and the danger of letting it rot. Now, as the country watched, Jasmine finally understood why she was here. Because sometimes systems don't collapse from outside. They shatter because one woman picks up the phone. The evidence lay bare under the studio lights. Signatures, payment trails, a note linking Ivanka, Melania, and Trump. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words rang with the weight of final judgment. I'm filing a formal subpoena request before sunrise. The words hit like an electric current. Gayle King froze mid-breath. Cameras zoomed in, sensing the gravity of the moment. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Across from her, Trump sat in silence. For the first time, the former president looked unsure if the ground beneath him was still solid. Melania sat unmoving, but in her eyes, recognition. The wall she'd trusted for years was no longer holding. Gayle finally managed a whisper. You're saying you'll subpoena the former First Lady of the United States? Jasmine nodded, slow and clear. The moment I leave this building, not just for her title, but for the trail she left and the women it helped erase. The control room scrambled to update the broadcast tag. Crockett announces subpoena request. It rolled across millions of screens. Outside, the temperature of the nation changed again. The idea of an untouchable First Lady was shattered in a single sentence. As Jasmine's words echoed, the country shifted. Producers in the control room scrambled to update headlines. Legal analysts dialed into newsrooms before the broadcast even ended. The world outside the studio moved fast, too fast for anyone to hide. Temperature in Washington changed, not with outrage, but with clarity. Jasmine had drawn a line, not for revenge, but for justice. Trump sat back, lips pressed tight, jaw working behind clenched teeth. Melania's posture remained perfect, but her eyes betrayed a quiet resignation. She was no longer above scrutiny, not just a symbol of grace in the shadows, but the next witness. The First Lady was no longer off limits. Jasmine Crockett had opened the door to history. She didn't need to raise her voice. The silence in the studio had become electric, loaded with meaning. Before she turned back to her evidence, Jasmine gestured to the screen behind her. A new video clip played, shaky, filmed on a phone. A woman in her 40s, seated at a kitchen table in Ohio, spoke directly to camera, voice tired but determined. The text on the screen read, Denise Harper, single mother, be best applicant, 2019. I voted for them. I believed her, Denise said. When Melania talked about kindness, about children, I thought, finally, someone cares. I filled out the grant form for my daughter's therapy. We never heard back. No call, no letter. But I still see that gala photo, her in diamonds. I just stopped believing. The video ended and the studio felt different. Not stunned, but suddenly personal. Jasmine stepped forward, folder in hand. Denise wasn't the only one. She opened to the first page facing the camera. Tonight, we're talking about children, not just what the nation was told, but what was actually delivered. She held up a sheet of official tax records from the Melania Style Foundation. It gleamed under the lights, a pristine ledger of corruption. This charity claimed to support children's mental health programs, Jasmine continued. They branded it as compassion, as be best. But what I hold is a masterclass in emotional fraud. She listed the numbers. 1.2 million and $2 million raised in one fiscal cycle, $600,000 funneled into high society event rentals in Milan, Monaco, Palm Beach, $300,000 for stylists, luxury makeup artists, brand consultants, $250,000 for private jets, security, floral aesthetics. She dropped the page on the table. And how much went to clinics for children? Her hand flattened on the wood. 0. The word hit like a gunshot. Gayle King's brow furrowed. The production team didn't cut the feed. Even they knew this wasn't politics. This was revelation. Jasmine turned to the big screen. Another shaky video played, a youth shelter in Scranton, Pennsylvania. A child sat at a folding table, maybe 10 years old, eyes hollow. A staff member's voice explained that they'd applied for the First Lady's outreach program. They said, Be Best offered therapy stipends and support. We filled out the paperwork, sent an email, never got a call back. The camera lingered on the child, ashamed of a silence that wasn't hers to carry. Jasmine returned to the podium. That child's mother died of fentanyl exposure. Her father's in prison for trafficking, and the richest woman in the East Wing sent her nothing, not a counselor, not a dime. Jasmine raised one final sheet. Instead, the foundation hosted a gala in Dubai, $78,000 on an ice sculpture of Melania's face, $43,000 on orchids imported from Zurich, all filed as mental health outreach. The studio was silent as stone. Jasmine leaned in, voice softer. This isn't about left or right. Tonight, it's about right and wrong. The air in the studio had turned heavy, not from smoke, but from the burn of shattered illusions. Jasmine stood unmoving, the screen behind her frozen on the image of a 10-year-old orphan who never got help. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It pulsed, a warning before the storm. She didn't reach for the next folder. She didn't need to. What she held now was a single letter, cream-colored and carefully folded, the edges worn like a memory someone tried to forget. Jasmine opened it slowly and began to read. I was with her every day, press events, planes, behind golden doors. I watched her rehearse smiles, pick out gowns, practice what empathy is supposed to look like. I begged her to speak, to say anything at all. Jasmine's voice thinned at the edges, but didn't break. She said, He protects me. The truth won't. The last word snapped the quiet like glass. Somewhere behind the cameras, a staffer gasped, but Jasmine stayed focused. She looked into the lens. This isn't a leak. It's a confession, verified by legal counsel, by voice print, written by a woman who once zipped Melania's dresses, carried her phone, knew every door in Trump Tower and what was hidden behind them. Gayle King's voice came as a whisper. Did she ever want to help? She wasn't asking Jasmine. She was asking the nation. Jasmine folded the letter and set it next to the orphan's file. This is the part we're never shown. Behind the gowns and hashtags, the decision to choose protection over principle. She paused, letting her words fill the emptiness. When history looks back on this night, it won't just ask what Melania Trump did, but what she didn't do, who she failed, and whether silence dressed in privilege can ever be called innocence. The camera zoomed in, locking on Jasmine's face. Is silence still innocence? She asked, when it comes with comfort. As she placed the letter beside the orphan's file, something in the nation finally cracked. Not in the studio, but everywhere. Phones buzzed like a national heartbeat. Hashtags multiplied faster than networks could keep up. New breaking news. 64% of Americans now supported a federal inquiry into Melania Trump's charity. Not a fringe poll, but Gallup. National. Verified. Jasmine stood unmoving, eyes scanning the room with readiness, not regret. She stepped forward, heels clicking like a gavel. If America wants answers, she said, voice unwavering, let's do it in the open. No redacted reports. Let her testify, under oath, on camera. The screens split behind her, a sea of tweets, headlines, and calls for subpoenas. Gayle King asked, "Are you saying you'll formally pursue this?" "I already did," Jasmine replied. "The subpoena paperwork was filed 32 minutes ago. The ink is dry." Control cut to a live press conference outside Capitol Hill. Reporters reading the same headline. Congressional oversight subpoenas Melania Trump in campaign finance, charity fraud case. The studio froze. Trump leaned back, the weight of his legacy visible in his eyes. Melania's hand twitched once, closing around her seat as if bracing for a storm. Jasmine didn't look at them. She faced the camera. "This isn't personal. It's overdue. If she did nothing wrong, she can speak. But if she enabled this, even by silence, then she's not above the law." Screens across the nation flashed red. First Lady under investigation. Americans weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. And on the studio screen, a final question hovered where Melania's signature had once appeared. Was this the end of a dynasty or the start of a reckoning? Long before the subpoenas, the red folders, and the storm on live TV, there was a little girl in the waiting room of a county clinic. The walls were pale green, chipped at the corners. Plastic chairs groaned beneath families with nowhere else to go. The air stung of bleach and quiet despair. Jasmine was 7. Her mother, just 34, struggling for breath as they waited. Too long. Jasmine clutched her mother's purse as if it held her own heartbeat. Finally, their number was called. A receptionist in a stiff blouse glanced at their chart and said, "Your Medicaid paperwork is incomplete. You've been denied." Jasmine's mother tried to protest. "We submitted the update last week. I have the confirmation letter." "It wasn't processed," the woman said flatly. "You'll need to reapply or pay in full today." Jasmine never forgot the sound of her mother's laugh, not laughter, but disbelief. Coughing blood into a tissue, her mother rasped, "So I need to die quietly because that's cheaper?" No answer. The receptionist simply looked away, a choice not to care. Jasmine's mother turned to her, sweat on her brow, but fire in her eyes. They respect silence. They fear justice. 2 weeks later, Jasmine's mother collapsed in their kitchen. She never got back up. The death certificate said pneumonia. Jasmine called it neglect. Systemic. Faceless. She wore black at the funeral, and a month later stood in court, holding her mother's denial letter like a weapon. The court wouldn't accept it as evidence, but it burned something into Jasmine that no verdict ever could. That night, she made a vow. "I will never be silent," she whispered, not to God, not to the walls, but to her own soul. "Not while anyone profits by pretending people like my mother don't exist." Years later, Jasmine stood on national television, facing a silence richer and more polished than any clinic lobby. Melania Trump hadn't coughed blood, she hadn't begged for care, but she had looked away from the women, the funds, the truth. Jasmine was done waiting. She stepped toward the mic, her voice forged in fire. I don't speak for myself because some women can't and some choose not to. She raised the file on the dead intern. Her voice didn't waver. This is no longer about a check. It's about what happens when silence becomes a dress code for the powerful. Was Jasmine confronting Melania or every woman who looked away? It wasn't a press conference or a news leak or a whistleblower's email. It began with a cocktail party, jazz in the background, a conversation caught by a guest who didn't realize what they were recording. Until Jasmine did. The audio was short, just 73 seconds, but it carried the weight of a crumbling dynasty. Jasmine played it like a detonator, holding the pen, letting the nation hold its breath. She tapped the desk, pressed play. Ivanka's voice glided out, smooth as silk but laced with poison. She knew, Ivanka said, laughter just audible. She helped keep it clean, the charities, the trips, the women. Daddy never had to ask, she just handled it. The best cover is a cause, and the silence, soft. Gayle King froze. Pundits in the side monitors stared. Control room staff scrambled to verify authenticity. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stared into the main camera. This is not speculation. This is not a smear. This is the family. Before the last word landed, Trump's lawyer burst into the studio, red-faced, waving a cease and desist. We're done. Cut the feed now. But the red tally light was still glowing, and America was listening. Even as Trump's attorney demanded the broadcast end, America had already started recording. Clips of the audio leaked instantly, mirrored, translated, uploaded worldwide. Jasmine didn't argue. She just leaned back, slowly closing the leather file as if sealing a casket. The storm had begun within the tower itself. Now, thunder echoed from Ivanka's voice, not Jasmine's. Melania sat motionless, Trump's knuckles white against the table. Gayle King whispered, half to herself. How much did she know? How long was she willing to pretend? The question didn't need answering. The silence was enough. When cracks appear from within, it's always the favorite daughter with the perfect smile who starts to speak in wine-soaked whispers. How long until the whole dynasty crumbles? By dawn, Melania was gone. No press line, no statement, no trace, just a growing absence. News helicopters circled Mar-a-Lago. Reporters staked out every penthouse from D.C. to Manhattan. Still, nothing. CNN called it tactical retreat. Fox News blamed stress. But even former staffers on air weren't buying it. Neither was Jasmine. Standing at a Capitol podium, Jasmine faced the crowd, not with a smirk, but with steel. Silence used to be her shield, she said, her voice cutting through the morning. Now it's her confession. Behind her, screens replayed the Ivanka tape on loop. Social media's top trend wasn't a hashtag, but a question. Where is Melania? Trump raged, posting, "She's safe, she's fine, this witch hunt will fail." But even Melania's own spokesperson refused to confirm her whereabouts. Jasmine didn't push. She didn't need more evidence. America had seen the power of someone vanishing just as truth finally reached her name. As Jasmine left the podium, a reporter called, "Will she speak?" Jasmine's heels clicked against the marble. She didn't turn, just answered, "She'll let the silence say it all." When walls fall, not from rage but from silence so complete it feels like strategy, what remains isn't just absence, it's guilt, a designer tag, a first lady gone missing just as the truth arrives. The congressional chamber was packed beyond capacity. Cameras trained not on a witness, but on the woman who had turned silence into testimony. Jasmine Crockett didn't sit. She stood, heels tapping out a countdown on the marble floor. Lawmakers, staff, and even Gayle King in the press gallery waited for her words. This was never about one woman, Jasmine began, voice smooth, unshaken. Not about pearls, gowns, or photo ops. It's about what happens when power buys silence and wraps it in couture to sell as virtue. She didn't pause. It's about the 7 women who were paid to disappear, the little boy who never got a reply, the assistant told that truth didn't fit the dress code. Screens behind her flashed. Melania on a yacht, in the Rose Garden, 7 checks, 1 ledger. They said she was elegant, Jasmine continued, but elegance isn't the absence of scandal. It's the illusion of immunity. A Republican on the other side of the aisle tried to object, but the speaker didn't yield. Jasmine's words were no longer argument, they were evidence. When she vanished, we saw what we weren't meant to see. The most dangerous silence isn't the kind that hides pain, it's the kind that lets it continue in the name of loyalty. She looked into the camera. I don't speak to convict a first lady, but to confront the system that let her play the part, while others paid the price. If this chamber represents the people, let it finally act like it. For a moment, there was no applause, only the slow-building, thunderous roar of a country finally waking up. The speech didn't just end in applause. It detonated. Within hours, city blocks from Oakland to Omaha filled with candlelight vigils and hand-painted signs. Truth wears heels. Silence is not a virtue. TikTok exploded with remixes of Jasmine's lines. In 72 hours, her speech hit 28 million views. Survivors stepped forward, one after another, voices blurred for safety, faces finally visible. College panels filled to the brim, libraries overflowed for silencing by donation town halls. At the Lincoln Memorial, 7 mannequins appeared in designer gowns, mouths covered with $100 bills. No one claimed the art, but every camera found it. Petitions soared. A bipartisan bill, the Crockett Amendment, landed in Congress, targeting PAC-to-charity laundering loopholes. It wasn't perfect, but it was loud, and the people were even louder. For the first time, the story wasn't about Melania's shoes or smile. It was about every first lady who'd ever stood beside power, while someone else disappeared beneath it. Jasmine cracked the dam, but it was the people who made the flood. In a diner outside Tulsa, a waitress pointed to the replaying speech. I don't know much about Congress, but I know when someone's telling the truth. Ethics watchdogs rushed to audit. Melania's stylist posted a cryptic story, a closed door and the words, "She knew." Through it all, Jasmine kept quiet, not out of fear, but because the echo was now louder than the source. This was never about vengeance. It was about visibility. The movement wasn't organized. It didn't wear a color or chant a slogan. It spread through tweets, classroom discussions, and late-night calls between mothers and daughters. Sometimes a movement doesn't start with a march. It begins with one woman standing up and millions refusing to sit back down. The question hanging over the Capitol wasn't whether Melania would be held accountable. It was whether America finally would. The chamber emptied. No more cameras, no spotlights, just the echo of applause lingering on marble walls. Jasmine sat alone in her office, a stack of mail before her, mostly anonymous. But one cream-colored envelope trembled at the edges. She opened it slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself might bruise. No return address, no date, just 5 words written in uneven pen. You didn't just speak for me, you freed. No name, just the weight of someone once buried, now breathing again. Jasmine didn't cry. She sat a long time, the only movement the gentle flutter of the letter between her fingers. Then she folded it, slipped it into her leather-bound journal, not to forget, but to carry as armor. Outside her window, the Capitol glowed against the night. News tickers rolled, protesters still crowded the plaza, but time seemed to slow inside her room. Jasmine wasn't speaking to millions now. She was answering one. She whispered, almost to herself, "Then it was worth it." The screen fades to black. Her voice lingers, steady and unshaken. Sometimes, silence protects power, but it exposes it too. What is the cost of your silence? Some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be heard. Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose a network of silence and power. She gave a voice back to those the world forgot. In a world where silence is bought, courage becomes the last honest currency. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Share your story. Sometimes your voice is the light someone else has been waiting for. If this story struck a chord, don't just scroll past. Like, share and subscribe to Mr. Truth Stories, where silence is shattered, and truth speaks louder than power. Tap the bell, because the next reveal might not just expose the powerful. It might awaken something in you,